It had been only weeks since Tony Stark returned from Afghanistan. His near-death experience in the desert had changed him, igniting a sense of responsibility and a desire to clean up his legacy. Stark Industries, once a massive arms manufacturer, was pivoting, and Tony had begun work on the Iron Man suit, his solution to the chaos his weapons had created. But as he buried himself in his work, unaware, a darker force was beginning to take shape in the shadows of his world. The first sign of trouble came through Obadiah Stane. Stane had kept his distance ever since Tony's declaration to cease weapons manufacturing, but behind the scenes he had been working with old allies, dangerous allies. Through back channels and secret deals, Stane had maintained contact with the Ten Rings, the terrorist group that had once held Tony captive. They had whispered to Stane of something ancient, something unstoppable, a force that had lingered on the fringes of history, leaving death and terror in its wake. The Ten Rings spoke of a man, or perhaps something less than human, a being they called the Shape. He had been seen in the shadows of war zones and ghost towns, killing without mercy, moving like a ghost through villages, leaving no survivors. His reputation for cold, unrelenting murder had caught Stane's interest. He saw an opportunity. If the Ten Rings could direct this force towards Stark Industries, it would further destabilize Tony's fragile position, leaving Stane to take control. Unbeknownst to Tony, Obadiah had already set things in motion. Pepper Potts was the first to notice that something was wrong. She had always been sharp, efficient, and quick to spot issues before they spiraled out of control. But lately, Stark Industries had felt different. The energy in the office had shifted. People were acting strange, more on edge than usual. Security incidents had been quietly cropping up, guards going missing, reports of strange sightings on the outskirts of the company's facilities. She had even seen someone lurking around Tony's mansion one night, though she dismissed it as a trick of the light. But the unease grew too loud to ignore when Pepper received a phone call late one evening. She had just finished up at the office and was heading home when a security guard's voice crackled through her phone. His tone was frantic, panicked. "Miss Potts, you need to get out of here." "Get out?" Pepper frowned, glancing at the security feed from her phone. "What are you talking about?" "He's here," the guard whispered, his voice trembling. That thing, he's killing everyone." A chill ran down Pepper's spine. "What thing? Who?" The line went dead. Pepper's hands shook as she checked the security footage from the office. What she saw made her heart stop. A tall figure dressed in mechanic overalls and wearing a pale, emotionless white mask was stalking through Stark Industries, his movements slow but deliberate. Bodies lay in his wake, guards, employees, anyone who had crossed his path. He carried a long, bloodied knife, and his silent, unhurried pace sent a wave of terror through her. "Tony," Pepper whispered, grabbing her phone to warn him. But as she dialed his number, the call failed to go through. Suddenly, the lights in the building flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. She turned, her breath quickening, as she heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps approaching. Her pulse raced, and she bolted for the exit, sprinting down the dimly lit corridors of Stark Industries. Behind her, the figure Michael Myers followed. His pace never quickened, yet he was always there, just out of reach like a nightmare she couldn't escape. Pepper reached the emergency exit, throwing the door open and fleeing into the parking lot. But before she could get to her car, Michael appeared in front of her, as if he had materialized out of thin air. His dark, empty eyes locked on her, and before she could scream, his knife came down. Tony Stark was working late in his lab when the news reached him. Pepper was dead, stabbed in the parking lot of Stark Industries, her body discovered by a security guard. The police were baffled, with no clues beyond the brutal scene. Tony's world collapsed. Pepper had been his closest confidant, the one person he trusted above all others, and now she was gone. He stared at her name on his phone, the missed call haunting him like a ghost. "Who did this?" Tony growled, his fist clenched, his mind racing. He had to know. But it wasn't just Pepper. Within the following days, Happy Hogan, Tony's loyal bodyguard, was found dead in his car outside the mansion, his throat slashed. Then came the news that several S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, including Phil Coulson, had been brutally murdered while investigating leads on the 10 Rings. All had been killed in the same eerily methodical way. No one could explain how the killer had gotten past them, how they had never even seen him coming. Tony's grief turned to fury. "Jarvis, run a full sweep of the security footage. I want to know who did this." The footage was chilling. A tall, emotionless figure wearing a white mask had walked into Stark Industries with terrifying calm. He had killed without hesitation, moving like a specter through the building. And then there was the knife, the same one found at every crime scene. Michael Myers, Jarvis identified after cross-referencing the images with historical records. Tony's heart pounded. The Halloween killer? That's impossible. He's just a myth. But it wasn't a myth, Jarvis continued. Michael Myers has a history of violent killings dating back to the 1970s. While presumed dead, recent reports suggest he may have resurfaced. Tony's mind reeled. This wasn't just any killer. It was something worse, something unstoppable. He couldn't help but think of the stories he'd heard as a child. The legend of Michael Myers stalking the streets of Haddonfield, slaughtering anyone who crossed his path. And now he was here targeting Stark Industries and everyone Tony cared about. But why? Tony's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock on the lab door. He turned, half expecting it to be another grim report, but instead, it was Obadiah Stane. "I heard the news, Tony," Stane said, his voice laced with fake sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss." Tony clenched his jaw, his hands shaking. "I'm going to find whoever did this, Obadiah, and when I do, I'm going to make sure they pay." Stane nodded slowly, though his expression was unreadable. "I'm sure you will, Tony, but sometimes things are beyond our control. And season to win us." As Stane left the room, Tony couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was wrong. He had always trusted Obadiah, but now there was something off, something sinister lurking beneath the surface. Tony turned back to the screen, watching the footage of Michael Myers again. There had to be a reason for this, a reason Michael was targeting him. But as he stared into the cold, dead eyes of the masked killer, he realized one terrifying truth. Michael Myers didn't need a reason. He was pure evil, and now he was coming for Tony. The loss of Pepper and Happy weighed heavily on Tony's shoulders, but the mounting horror of the situation was too overwhelming to process fully. Michael Myers, the legendary killer from Haddonfield, wasn't just a myth, and somehow he had set his sights on Stark Industries. The reports of Michael's murders in Illinois had always been the stuff of urban legend, stories to scare children on Halloween. But now, the killings were very real, and Tony knew this wasn't something he could fix with his suit or technology. Stark Industries was in chaos. Employees had resigned in droves after word of the brutal murders leaked to the media. Shareholders were on edge, fearing for their investments. And to make matters worse, S.H.I.E.L.D. had gone dark, its agents either dead or missing, leaving Tony alone in his fight to uncover what was happening. But in the shadows, Obadiah Stane was already playing his hand. Obadiah had known more about Michael Myers than he had let on to Tony. For weeks, he had been in secret communication with the Ten Rings, who had brought him stories of the killer, a man who could not be stopped, who felt no pain, and who moved through his victims like death incarnate. Stane had seen an opportunity in Michael Myers, a force of nature that could be harnessed, manipulated, turned into a weapon far more dangerous than anything Tony had ever created. And now, with Stark Industries teetering on the brink of collapse, Stane decided it was time to act. Tony barely slept anymore. His mind was consumed with the mystery of Michael Myers and why this killer was targeting him. Every night, he ran simulations, cross-referenced the footage, and analyzed everything he could about the Halloween murders from decades ago. But nothing made sense. Michael's killings had always seemed random, senseless. There was no pattern, no motive, only death. "Jarvis, pull up everything we have on the Myers family," Tony said, pacing in his workshop. "Accessing now, sir," Jarvis replied, projecting images and documents onto the screen. As Tony sifted through the files, he realized there was no logical explanation for why Michael had resurfaced. He was a force of evil, pure and simple, but there had to be a way to stop him. If Tony could build the most advanced suit of armor in the world, surely he could find a way to outsmart one man, even if that man was a nearly indestructible killer. But Michael Myers wasn't just a man. The footage from Stark Industries replayed in Tony's mind. Michael had moved through the facility without hesitation, killing everyone in his path with terrifying efficiency. Pepper's face flashed before his eyes, and Tony's chest tightened. He had failed to protect her. He had failed to protect all of them. Suddenly, the workshop's lights flickered, and Tony's head snapped up. "Jarvis, what's going on?" "Sir, I'm detecting a breach in the mansion's security system," Jarvis replied, his normally calm voice laced with urgency. Tony's heart raced. He immediately activated the Mark III suit, the armor locking into place around him as he flew up to the main floor of the mansion. The security feeds showed nothing, just darkness. But Tony knew better. Michael Myers had come for him. As Tony hovered in the center of the room, scanning every shadow, a sound echoed through the mansion. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. They were slow, measured, as if the killer wasn't in any hurry to reach him. Tony's eyes darted toward the source of the sound, but there was nothing there. "Come on out, you son of a bitch," Tony muttered, his repulsors primed. But Michael didn't appear. The footsteps stopped, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. Tony's hands shook inside his gauntlets, and for the first time in years, he felt true fear. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the lab below. Tony flew down, but by the time he arrived, the lab was empty. A trail of blood led out into the hallway, and Tony's stomach twisted. "Jarvis, what happened?" Tony demanded. "The intruder has left the premises," Jarvis replied. "But there was a casualty." Tony's heart sank as he followed the trail of blood, his suit clanking heavily against the floor. When he reached the end of the hallway, he froze. Phil Coulson, one of the last SHIELD agents investigating the killings, lay dead on the ground, his throat slashed open. Tony clenched his fists, rage building inside him. "This ends now," Tony growled. Meanwhile, Obadiah Stane stood in his office, watching the chaos unfold through the security feeds. Everything was going according to plan. Tony was unraveling, consumed by fear and grief. Michael Myers had proven to be the perfect weapon, unstoppable, emotionless, and terrifyingly efficient. Stane knew that Michael couldn't be controlled in the traditional sense, but he didn't need control. He just needed chaos. And with Tony distracted by the murders, Stain could finalize the development of the Ironmonger's suit without interference. He would take over Stark Industries, eliminate Tony, and harness the terror of Michael Myers to ensure his dominance. The 10 Rings had supplied Stain with everything he needed to locate Michael and direct him towards Stark Industries. They had encountered the killer years ago, witnessing his horrifying strength firsthand, and had realized that such power could be useful. They had whispered stories to Obadiah of Michael's unnatural resilience, his ability to survive anything, his seemingly inhuman will to kill. Stain smiled darkly as he watched the footage of Tony flying through the mansion, desperately searching for answers. "You're already beaten, Tony," he muttered. "You just don't know it yet." Back in the mansion, Tony's mind was racing. He had seen enough. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to find Michael before more people died. He would hunt the killer down himself if he had to. But just as he was about to leave, a message came through from Jarvis. "Sir, I've accessed a hidden file from Stark Industries' secure servers. It appears to contain information regarding the 10 Rings' dealings with Obadiah Stane." Tony froze. "Obadiah, what do you mean?" Jarvis projected the file onto the screen and Tony's heart dropped. The file contained a series of encrypted messages between Stane and the 10 Rings, detailing their discovery of Michael Myers and their plan to unleash him on Stark Industries. Stane had orchestrated the murders. He had used the 10 Rings to bring Michael to him, hoping to destabilize Tony and take control of the company. "Stane," Tony muttered, his eyes narrowing in fury. "I trusted you." The pieces clicked into place. Stane had been manipulating events from the beginning, using Michael Myers as a tool to further his own ambitions. The deaths of Pepper, Happy, and Coulson. It was all part of Stane's twisted game. Tony slammed his fist into the wall, his mind racing with anger and betrayal. Stane had to be stopped. But first, he needed to deal with Michael. "Jarvis, track the last known location of Michael Myers," Tony commanded, his voice filled with grim determination. "Tracking now, sir," Jarvis replied. "It appears he is still within the city limits." Tony's hands tightened into fists as he prepared to leave. He had lost too much already. Pepper, Happy, Coulson. But this time, it would end differently. This time, he would take the fight to Michael and end the nightmare once and for all. But as Tony soared into the night, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. Stane's betrayal had shaken him to the core. But Michael was something else entirely. Tony knew one thing for certain. He wasn't dealing with just another enemy. He was dealing with evil incarnate. The night sky over Los Angeles was dark and foreboding as Tony Stark flew toward the industrial district, his heart pounding with fury and fear. The Mark III armor hummed with power, his repulsors blazing a bright path through the sky. Jarvis had tracked Michael Myers to an abandoned Stark Industries facility, a location Tony knew well, one that had been decommissioned years ago. It was the perfect place for Obadiah Stane to make his move. As Tony approached the facility, he saw the destruction below. The once pristine building was a ruin, its windows shattered and its walls cracked. Bodies of security personnel and SHIELD agents littered the ground, their deaths silent witnesses to Michael's deadly efficiency. Tony gritted his teeth, landing with a thud outside the facility. "Jarvis, scan for life signs," Tony ordered, his voice cold with determination. "Scanning now, sir," Jarvis replied. "I'm detecting 2 life forms inside. One matches the profile of Obadiah Stane. The other appears to be Michael Myers." Tony's heart sank. He had prepared himself for this moment, but knowing that both Stain and Michael were waiting inside filled him with a deep sense of dread. Stain had used Michael as a weapon, unleashing a force of pure evil to destabilize him, to kill everyone he cared about. Pepper, Happy, Coulson, they were all dead because of Stain's greed and Michael's unrelenting bloodlust. "Time to end this," Tony muttered as he stormed toward the entrance. Inside the facility, the air was thick with tension. Tony moved cautiously through the dimly lit halls, his suit's sensors on full alert. The silence was eerie, broken only by the distant creaking of the old building. His repulsors cast faint shadows on the walls, flickering like dying embers. As Tony approached the main chamber, a massive figure emerged from the shadows. Obadiah Stane, wearing the Ironmonger suit. The towering armored behemoth loomed over Tony, its red eyes glowing with malice. "Tony," Stain's voice echoed through the chamber, cold and mocking. "You've been busy, haven't you? Running around trying to figure out what's happening, while I've been playing you like a puppet?" Tony's fists clenched inside the suit. "You killed them, Obadiah. All of them. You used that psycho to do your dirty work." Stain laughed darkly. "It's not about killing, Tony. It's about power. Michael Myers is a force unlike anything I've ever seen. You should have used your genius for something like that. Instead, you squandered it on childish heroics, but now you're gonna pay the price." Behind Stain, another figure stepped into the light. Michael Myers, silent and terrifying, his emotionless mask gleaming under the dim lights. The sight of him sent a chill down Tony's spine. There was no reasoning with him, no bargaining. Michael was death incarnate, and he was here to finish what he had started. Stain took a step forward in the Ironmonger's suit, his voice full of menace. "You see, Tony, while you've been tinkering with your little toys, I've been preparing for this. I'm going to use Michael to destroy you, and then I'll take over Stark Industries. You'll be nothing but a memory." The fight exploded into action. Tony launched himself into the air, firing repulsor blasts at Stain's massive suit. Ironmonger retaliated with a barrage of missiles, the explosions lighting up the chamber. The two armored giants clashed with the force of a hurricane, their attacks shaking the building's foundations. But in the chaos, Michael Myers moved silently, stalking through the destruction like a predator in the night. Tony kept one eye on him, knowing that Michael could strike at any moment. Stain swung a massive fist at Tony, the Ironmonger's metal hand smashing into Tony's side and sending him crashing into the wall. Tony grunted in pain, the impact rattling his entire body, but he quickly recovered, flying back into the fight. He couldn't afford to be distracted, not with both Stain and Michael against him. "Give it up, Tony!" Stain roared, firing a blast from his chest reactor. Tony dodged, firing back with his own repulsors, but he couldn't keep up with the onslaught. Stain's suit was built for raw power, and Tony's suit, while advanced, was taking damage. The fight was becoming more desperate by the second. Suddenly, Michael struck. In a flash of movement, the masked killer lunged at Tony, his knife slicing through the air. Tony barely managed to block the attack with his gauntlet, but Michael's strength was terrifying. He forced Tony to the ground, his cold black eyes staring into Tony's through the mask. Tony struggled, his suit sparking under the pressure. He fired a repulsor blast at Michael's chest, sending him staggering back, but it wasn't enough. He never stopped. As Tony scrambled to his feet, Stain took advantage of the distraction. He charged at Tony, slamming into him with the full weight of the Ironmonger's suit. Tony was thrown across the chamber, his armor dented and cracked from the impact. "Is this the best you've got, Tony?" Stain laughed, his voice booming through the chamber. "You were never cut out for this." Tony gasped for breath, his vision blurring. He couldn't keep this up. Stane was too powerful. And Michael was a force beyond anything he had ever faced. His mind raced, searching for a way out. But then, just as Stane prepared to deliver the killing blow, Michael turned. Without warning, Michael Myers lunged at Stane, his knife plunging into the exposed wiring of the ironmonger's suit. Stane's laughter turned to screams of pain and terror as Michael ripped open the armor, tearing through the metal like it was nothing. Stane tried to fight back, but Michael was relentless. "Wait! No!" Stane's voice was cut off as Michael drove the knife into his chest, silencing him forever. Stane's lifeless body collapsed to the ground, the ironmonger's suit falling with a deafening crash. Tony, battered and broken, stared in disbelief as Michael stood over Stane's body, his expressionless mask unchanging. The killer had no loyalty, no motive, only death. And now, Tony was next. Tony staggered to his feet, his suit barely holding together. His repulsors were damaged, his chest reactor flickering with the last vestiges of power. He was vulnerable, exposed, and Michael knew it. Michael turned toward Tony, his dark eyes locking onto him like a predator, eyeing its prey. He walked forward slowly, methodically, his knife gleaming in the dim light. Tony's heart pounded in his chest. He had faced terrorists, weapons dealers, and even his own mentor. But this was different. Michael Myers wasn't human. He was death itself, and there was no stopping him. Tony raised his hand, his repulsor flickering weakly. "Come on, you son of a bitch," he muttered, his voice hoarse. But Michael was unstoppable. He grabbed Tony by the chest, his hands crushing the metal armor with terrifying strength. Tony gasped in pain as the suit cracked, sparks flying, as the arc reactor dimmed. No. Tony struggled, but it was useless. With a sickening crunch, Michael ripped open the armor, exposing Tony's chest. The arc reactor flickered weakly, the light fading. Tony's eyes widened in horror as Michael raised the knife, his face expressionless behind the mask. The blade came down, slicing through the arc reactor, shattering it completely. The light in Tony's chest went out. As the suit powered down, Tony Stark, the invincible Iron Man, fell to the ground, his body lifeless and broken. Michael Myers stood over him, silent and unmoving, the knife dripping with blood. The room was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of machinery. The legendary Tony Stark, hero and genius, was dead. And Michael Myers was still out there. Nick Fury stands at the center of the control hub, his lone eye fixed on the large screen in front of him. The room is filled with the sounds of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents working quietly around him, but none dare speak. Fury's expression is unreadable, but the tension radiating off him is palpable. On the screen is a frozen image. Tony Stark's broken Iron Man suit, lying lifeless on the ground, a knife embedded in the arc reactor's remains. The camera footage is shaky and unclear, but the horror of what happened is undeniable. Maria Hill steps forward, her voice low. "It's confirmed. Tony Stark is dead. We've analyzed the footage from Stark Industries. It's bad, Nick." Fury clenches his jaw, his hands curling into fists. "How the hell did this happen?" he growls, his voice cold but laced with fury. "Stark was supposed to be untouchable. I left him to handle his own damn business and now he's dead. Who the hell did this?" Hill hesitates, then presses a button on the console. The image on the screen shifts, revealing grainy security footage of Michael Myers, the silent masked killer, stalking through Stark Industries, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. This is the man responsible," Hill says, her voice tight. "Michael Myers, he's not normal, Nick. The reports are Disturbing. He's been killing for decades. There are even files dating back to the 1970s. Fury narrows his eye, staring at the screen. Michael Myers' blank, emotionless mask stares back, frozen in time. You're telling me some psychopath in a Halloween mask killed Tony Stark? Fury's voice is low, dangerously calm. It's not just that, Hill replies, shifting uncomfortably. Myers isn't like anything we've seen before. He's not just a man. He survived things that should have killed him. There are accounts of him being shot, burned, stabbed, and he keeps coming back. It's like he's unstoppable. Fury's gaze remains fixed on the screen, his expression hardening. The weight of the loss hangs heavy in the air. Tony Stark had been more than just a member of the Avengers initiative. He had been a friend, an ally, a genius who could change the world. And now, he was gone, slaughtered by a relentless killer. Unstoppable, huh? Fury mutters, his voice filled with quiet rage. I've dealt with unstoppable before. Hill stands at attention, sensing the shift in Fury's demeanor. What do you want to do, sir? Fury's lips curl into a grim smile, the anger barely contained behind his calm exterior. We find him. We bring him in. And if this Michael Myers thinks he can go around killing the people we need to protect this world, then he's got another thing coming. He turns away from the screen, his coat swaying behind him as he heads for the exit. Prep the Quinjet, and get me everything we have on this bastard. Hill nods, quickly turning to relay the order. Yes, sir. We'll mobilize immediately. As Fury reaches the door, he pauses, his hand resting on the frame. He doesn't look back, but his voice carries a weight that leaves no room for doubt. Stark may be gone, but we're not gonna let this psycho walk away from this. You tell everyone, and I don't care how unstoppable he thinks he is. We're going to hunt him down. The door slides open with a hiss, and Fury disappears into the corridor. Fury looks at the frozen image of Michael Myers on the screen, his mask staring blankly. Nobody kills one of mine and gets away with it.